Hi, hello and welcome to week 4 problem solving session for the NPTEL course on environmental impact assessment. This course is being taught by Dr. Harshit Soshan Lakra, who's an assistant professor at the Department of Architecture and Planning, Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee. And I'm Isha Rathore, PMRF and Research Scholar at Department of Architecture and Planning, Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee. And so a few house rules. Please mute yourself for the session. If you have any queries or if you have any questions during different parts of the session, you can put them in the chat box or when I ask you for your queries. And for answering questions, which we will look at, you can put your answers in the chat box, and I will look your answers from the chat box. If you have any queries at different point of the session, you can either raise your hand or you can put your questions in the chat box, and you can unmute yourself for asking questions when asked by me. Okay, so let's move on. So the outline of the session is that we are going to look up at highlights from the week 4 content. We're going to look up at key takeaways from each of the lecture units which were covered in this week. And we will also look up at assignment questions, solution to assignment questions with explanations from the previous run of the course. So we will look up at some additional questions and answers for practice. And we will also look up at week 3 assignment questions with their solutions, as the deadline for that assignment has passed now. Lastly, if we received any queries from you in the discussion forum, we will cover that as well. So please make use of the discussion forum or ask a question tab, which is available in your NPTEL portal, to ask any queries which you have throughout the week's content, and we can cover them in these problem solving sessions. Okay, so week 4 looked up at EIA methodologies for the different sections, different environmental parameters. So let's look up at the highlights from week 4. So the first lecture in week 4 was lecture 16, which looked up at EIA law, policy, and institutional arrangements for EIA systems. For water, soil, land, and geology, we have covered air and water air previously. So now we're going to look up at water, soil, land, and geology. So here we looked up at key legislation, guidance, and standards for water, and we also looked up at the EU Water Framework Directive, which was uh, enforced in the year 2000. Then we looked up at World Bank's Operational Policy 4.01, which highlighted the key priority areas in which the World Bank functions. So these are consideration of cross-sectoral impacts in a regional settings like river basins. It also looks up at restoration and preservation of aquatic ecosystems, avoidance of waterlogging and salinity problems associated with irrigation investments, and also specifies pollution and abatement measures and emission levels. So these are some of the key priority areas in which the World Bank functions, that is, has an operational role in managing these key priority areas. We also looked up at institutional structure for water management in India, where we look up at the different institutions which are available, the different authorities and organizations which are present in India, and what roles and functions they have. So the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, the MOEF and CC, or MOEFCC as is the short form for this. So it looks up at policies and programs for conservation of natural resources and pollution abatement and guidance for sustainable development and enhancement of human well-being. So, so basically, they look up at programs and policy on a broader level to look up at sustainable use of natural resources and conservation of natural resources. Also, at the same time, having policies and pollution control measures such that development activities can happen sustainably. Then we have MOA, which looks up at the formation of policy, sponsorship, and support programs. It also looks up at the coordination of activities of the different central ministry, state government, and other nodal authorities, and monitors the programs which concern housing and urban affairs. So MOA is Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. So it also looks up at majorly looks up at projects which are on housing and urban affairs, but it looks up at them in terms of how they are also affecting the environment systems, particularly pertaining to water, soil, land, and geology. Then we have Ministry of Jal Shakti, which was. Can you please mute yourself? I would request the participants to. Yeah, thank you. Then we also have the Ministry of Jal Shakti, which was formed in May 2019 by merging the Ministry of Drinking Water and Sanitation, Ministry of Water Resources, River Development in Ganga region and Ganga rejuvenation for optimal sustainable development, maintenance of quality, and efficient use of water resources. So this was a ministry which was merged out of these three ministries at that time, these three ministries and organizations at that time, and it looks up at quality control and sustainable development measures of water resources. So under these institutes, we also have subunits. We have the Central Pollution Control Board, we have the State Pollution Control Board, which are basically under the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. That is the basically report to this institute, and they also have their own rules. So the Central Pollution Control Board looks up that the different projects basically follow the Environment Protection Act of 1986, and in them it looks up at both air pollution as well as water pollution. Uh, and the state pollution control board looks up at it in particular states. So if you remember, we look up at the different we need different environmental clearance from these bodies when a proposal or a site is proposed for development. So it looks up at the kind of impact it's going to have. Then we have the CPHEEO, which again looks up at public health engineering and environmental engineering. So it has specialists in those areas. And it also looks up at giving technical advice, guidelines, scrutiny, and appraisal of schemes. And it basically is a subunit for MOA. And then Ministry of Jal Shakti has different other roles as well. So these are some organizations or ministries which have a um involvement in water management in India and their roles. So you can read about them or refer to the lecture unit for more details. Then we also looked up at drinking water standards in India. So we have the CPCB, which gives us the BIS drinking water specialization, which is the Indian standard 10500, which was passed in year 2012. So this standard gives you the different characteristics, which is the color, the odor, pH value, taste, and total dissolved solid, all of these different characteristics of water and their requirement or acceptable unit for it to be drinking water, to qualify as drinking water. And yeah, different requirements and different testing methods are mentioned in the standard. So we have different standards which are used for the uh, water quality assurance, basically. Then we also look up at standards for emission or discharge of environmental pollutants from various industries. So what different industries so different industries have different usage of water and different amount of wastewater or emissions or discharge of pollutants in the water after the water has been used for the process for that particular industry. So then we have standards for their for this wastewater or discharge of environmental pollutants which come out of various industries, basically. So you can refer to these sources if you want to read more in detail, but this is just for a general idea on how different industries will have different requirements and different documents you have to refer back if you're doing a AIA for a project which is consuming water. So you have to refer to these documents to see what industry and how much, what are the standards, what are the requirements of the emissions and discharge which you can do. Okay, then we also looked up at the environment protection rules, which is Schedule 4. So this gives you the general standards for discharge of environmental pollutants. Again, on the same criteria as color, odor, suspended solids, particulate size of suspended solids. So again, you can refer to the link to look up at. So this is general, whereas the previous ones were specifically for industry types. Then we have sewage treatment plants also discharge standards. Then you have the biological oxygen demand, BOD, chemical oxygen demand, COD, total suspended solids, TSS, pH level, and all of these other things, ammonical nitrogen, and all of these other different type of parameters, and the kind of norms which are passed for public sewers, land irrigation, marine coastal areas, inland surface water. So all of these different norms and what are the standards as per the different over time and how they have been reformed. Okay, so we have a lot of standards. So you can, if you're doing a project or a proposal specifically which requires development of a industrial kind of activity which has a water element or parameter to it, you can refer to these documents. So again, for treated sewage, we have the same sort of parameters, and then for different activities like toilet flushing, fire protection, vehicle exterior washing, and all of these landscaping, horticulture, and agriculture, and then different elements under it as well. So those standards are also available. Then we also looked up at the overview of policies and acts in India relating to wastewater management. So here we had the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974, which the CPCB and the SPCB maintain and enforce. Then 1986 Environmental Protection Act, so protection and improvement of environment in a larger sense. 1995 National Environment Tribunal Act, 2008 National Urban Sanitation Policy, 2011 National Mission for Clean Ganga, and 2012 the National Water Policy or NWP. So all of these different acts and their purposes are, we also discussed them in this lecture unit. And then we looked up at water quality criteria under designated best use cases. So by the Central Pollution Control Board. So they have defined different classes of water from A to below E. So A to E, and then the last one below E is basically if it does not meet any of these criteria. So then again, those criteria is given in terms of the requirement of water. So A is for drinking water source without conventional treatment but after disinfection. B is for outdoor bathing. C for drinking water source after conventional treatment and disinfection. D is for propagation of wildlife and fisheries. So different characteristics like pH values vary for the different kind of water which can be used. So those characteristics are mentioned. So the CPCB has given water quality criteria. So if, for example, you have to ensure that if you're using water for landscape and irrigation, the water quality is equivalent to landscape and irrigation requirements. So things like that you have to ensure when you have your proposals. Okay. Then we also looked up at key legislation guidance and standards for soil, land, and geology. So we looked up at the different programs and different agendas and activities which have happened regarding this. So we looked up at global geosite programs, IUGS, UNESCO Global Geoparks, UN Earth Summit Agenda 21, which gave an integrated approach to planning and management of land resources. We looked up at United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 15, which talks about life on land. Then we looked up at Soil Thematic Strategy of 2006, the UK Comprehensive Guidance on Soil Handling for Land Resources, the IFC Standard PS3, which looks up at resource efficiency and pollution prevention, and Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, EP of 1980. So for further details regarding this, you can refer to the lecture unit. But this is what was covered regarding to land and geology, soil, land, and geology. Then we have, if we look up at Indian standards, so the CPCB also have different regulations, pollution control acts for land, soil, and geology. So those are also mentioned here. So different sections cover different parts. So mostly part 3 covers uh, acts and rules relating to land, soil, and geology. So you can read about them further from the CPCB guidelines. Then in soil, land, and geology, we also look up at highway projects which happen in hilly areas. So there's a checklist for erosion control. So it looks up at, it asks different questions on whether the construction project has necessary measures against soil erosions which can happen during construction, whether they have soil maps and aerial photographs, studies and investigations which make it easier to locate areas or sections with a high erosion potential where erosion can happen more, uh, and different other characteristics. So you can look up at them also in detail. Then we have the again CPCB guidance for assessment of representativeness and reliability of baseline environmental attributes. So when you do a sort of assessment, you look up at so especially pertaining to soil, you do an assessment on the particle size distribution, texture, pH level, electrical conductivity of soil, the cation exchange capacity, alkali metals which are present, sodium absorption ratio, permeability, water holding capacity, porosity. So all of these different parameters you sample from one surface from each village or from your site or from different points in site as per whatever the requirements are mentioned in the Indian standards, and the frequency at which you have taken them, whether seasonal soil characteristics are measured, or once throughout the project is mentioned, what measurement method has been used, and if there are any remarks or anomalies which were found. So all of these are mentioned when you give a final EIA report. So this is sort of a indicator of how you give uh, how you do a EIA for soil at your site. Similarly, for land use or landscape, you have similar kind of consideration of parameters. So you have location code, total project area, what is the topography of the site, the drainage networks which are naturally present, and how they have been collected, like satellite images at different scales. Then you also look up at cultivated forest plantations, water bodies, roads, and settlements. So all of these different land use or landscape characteristics which are available at your site. So again, you give the measurement method, you give the frequency of measurement, and all of those things, remarks. Okay, so this is relating to land use and environment. So similarly, you generate reports which give these kind of data in the final EIA study report which you give. So then we move on to next lecture unit, which was lecture 17. So here we are again looking at EIA, law, policy, and institutional arrangements for the EIA system, but now we are looking at ecology. So here in this lecture, we discuss international and multilateral agreements and conventions. So we first looked up at the Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD of 1992. So this was adopted at the Rio Earth Summit, and India is a part and became a party to this Convention on Biological Diversity in Feb of 1994. So the biodiversity target of the CBD is reduction in the rate of biodiversity loss by 2010 using the EIA approach. So under this, we they set up strategic goals for biodiversity between the period of 2011 to 2020 at the COP10 or MOP, and this included the Aichi Nagoya uh, measures or strategy. Uh, the main aim of the CBD was to reduce the direct pressures which are felt on biodiversity and promote sustainable use of biodiversity, to improve the status of biodiversity by safeguarding ecosystem, species, and genetic diversity, and to enhance the benefits to society from biodiversity and ecosystem services, and enhances the implementation through participatory planning, knowledge management, and capacity building. We will look up at the Aichi Nagoya strategy in one question further down the lecture in slightly detail. What are these principles? But this was the main aim of the CBT, to conserve and reduce the reduction of biodiversity loss which was happening. Okay, then we also had the Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals. So this was in the Bonn Convention of 1979, and they said to use of AIA to protect threatened animals, to maintain viable migration routes that migrate across sea or the national boundaries. So to basically protect the migration routes of migratory birds or migratory species. And in India, they adopted this convention in the year of 1983. Then we have the 1971 Ramsar Convention on Wetlands of International Importance. So this convention basically identifies and places priority on wetlands onto the list of wetlands of international importance. So we identify wetland areas which are to be conserved basically. We also had the UNESCO Man and the Biosphere Program of 1970. So, under this, biosphere reserves, which are globally important areas that should be avoided when development is planned. So, these are areas which are biologically very rich, so we don't want any development to happen. And these areas should be first identified by the governments across the world, and then certain measures and strategy should be employed in these areas such that they are conserved and protected from any development activity. So currently there are 727 biosphere reserves in 131 countries, including 22 transboundary sites that belong to the World Network of Biosphere Reserves. So the number of biosphere reserves might have changed because this module was developed in 2021. So the actual numbers might be different, but for your examination, if a question like this comes, please refer to the numbers which are mentioned in the uh, slides. Okay. Because these biosphere reserves can be added over the years, as well as the governments identify the different areas which need protection or which are biologically more active. So over the years, these numbers can change, but for your examination point, just remember the numbers which are mentioned in the slides itself, or have a brief idea on what the correct answer should be according to the module. Okay, so the government of India implemented the UNESCO Man and Biosphere Program in 1986, and the government of India has established 18 biospheres in the country, which are relating to the IUCN. Okay. Then we also had the UNESCO World Heritage Convention of 1972. So this was basically to protect natural and cultural areas of outstanding value as World Heritage sites and biodiversity importance. So it came into force in 1975, and India adopted this convention in 1977. Then the Berne Convention of 1976 aimed at protecting the endangered species and their habitats. So in 1989 and 1996, they tried to include the Emerald Network of areas of special conservation interest, supporting the European Habitat Directives. And 49 out of 51 European countries are signatory to this Berne Convention. And for African countries, which include uh, Burkina Faso, Senegal, Tunisia, and Morocco. Then we have the Pan-European Biological and Landscape Diversity Strategy, or short form abbreviated as PEBLDS. So this was developed by the Council of Europe, United Nations Environment Programme, and the European Centre for Nature Conservation. And this organization, this strategy basically ensures the conservation of Europe's key species, habitats, and ecosystem, and it links the European and national protected areas and ecological networks. So this was another international convention. Then we have certain European policies like the EU Biodiversity Strategy, which produces biodiversity action plans. We have the Wild Birds Directives of 1979. So this looks up at special protection areas of SPS, which looks up at protection of rare species, protect wild bird species and their habitats. So these are two European policies. Then again, further in European policies, we also have the Habitats Directive 1992 and further amendments. So it looks up at special areas of conservation or SACs for protection of habitats and species using measures to maintain or restore their favorable conservation status. And it uses tools for land use and development policies and landscape management outside the special areas of conservation SACs to safeguard species needing strict protection. Then we also have the World Water Framework Directive of 2000. So it gives uh, this is for establishing a good status for the quality of water which we have, and the tools which they use is management of aquatic, wetland, and terrestrial ecosystem. Then, looking at national and regional legislation, we of course have the EIA notification of 2006. So the general condition under EIA notification is that any project or activity which is specified in category B will be treated as category A if located in whole or in part within 10 kilometers from the boundary of. So there's a category B in which you have to do an EIA if it is above a certain built up area. You have to do EIA for the project based on the type of development one you are doing and what is the minimum requirement area for which EIA needs to be done. So category B lists the activity and the project and the area. So you have to do EIAs for projects in category B. But if uh, sorry. Yeah, so category B, you don't need to do EIA, but category A has all of these conditions on projects and area and type. But if category B is to be treated as category A, if it is located within 10 kilometers of protected areas, which are identified under the Wildlife Protection Act, or if it is within 10 kilometers of critically polluted areas as identified by the CPCB, or if it is near to eco-sensitive areas, which are identified under the Environmental Protection Act. and in areas such as Mahabaleshwar, Panchgani, Mathiran, Pachmadi, the Hanudun Valley, and other areas. And also, if it is located close to interstate boundaries and international boundaries, then any development which is happening within 10 kilometers from any of these areas will be treated as category A, and an EIA has to be done for that kind of development activity as well, for that proposal as well, basically. So this was the EIA notification. Then we have certain comprehensive legislations which basically include measures to protect habitats, species, and areas under the single overarching act. So these include um, legislations like the Wildlife Conservation and Management Act in Kenya, the Indian Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, the UK Wildlife and Countryside Act of 1985. Then we also have the specific legislation which relate to protection of specific areas only, specific areas or habitats or species. So these include, for areas, you have the National Park legislation of 1980. You have the New Zealand National Parks Act of 2003, South African Protected Areas Act. So it basically gives legislation or measures to protect certain areas which are identified in these legislations itself. Then for certain species like the 1992 UK Protection of Badgers Act. So it protects species of badgers only. So if the act or legislation relates to protection of particular area, it is area specific act. If it relates to protection of particular habitats, it's habitat specific legislation. Or if it's related to particular species, then it's species specific legislation. If it covers overall general measures to protect or the larger theme of area to protect, then it's a comprehensive legislation or act. So for habitats or land use, we have the forest laws of Brazil and India. So it gives you like for particular forest habitats, you have to follow these measures. You have these measures and guidelines. So that is one distinction. Then we have several other legislation and acts which were discussed in this module as well. So in India, as per the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change annual report, it gives an annual report on the status and different conventions which it is under. So it gives the annual report on the Biodiversity Conservation Act. It gives the Convention of Biological Diversity (CBD) report. So it has all of these sections which tell you what all has been done and identified new, or what is the status of all of these conventions which are running since they were adopted. So it gives the annual report on conservation biodiversity, Convention on Biological Diversity (CBD), the Nagoya Protocol on Access and Benefit Sharing (ABS), the National Biodiversity Action Plan (NBAP), National Biodiversity Targets (NBTs), National Report to CBD, Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and the domestic measures, namely the Biological Diversity Act and the National Biodiversity Authority. So all of these are basically documented. They document the status of all of these conventions or measures or the acts which they have adopted over the years. Then we have certain other national and regional level legislation and acts which were discussed. When we also looked up at codes of practice and best practices which are available. So we have in best practices, we have the AIA guidance of UK Institute of uh, Ecology and Environmental Management. We also have the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, which has its manual and guidance. Then we also looked up at certain agencies which fund these kind of efforts in ecology. So we have the Danish International Development Agency, United Nations Agency for International Development, USAID. We have the Japan International Cooperation Agency, JICA or Zika. Then we also looked up at a section which is the special interest groups. So special interest groups are groups which take a very special interest in the preservation and conservation of certain aspects of ecology, which is close to them geographically, or have a general sort of environmental awareness towards particular aspects or species or habitats near to them. So if your area has these kind of groups, then you need to consider the scope, technical competence, validity, and proposed mitigation measures. So at different stages, you also have participation measures, like where the stakeholders and community gives you feedback. So during those times, you can have these special interest groups and their observations and their remarks addressed in these in that participation period. So you also need to have an indication of whether they are going to support or oppose the planning activities which are going to happen. So there are certain special interest and conservation groups for different species or taxas, such as bats, butterflies, birds, reptiles, and amphibians. So different uh, species basically. So within species, there are also hierarchies. So if they are interested in particular species or groups only. Then we also have examples like the Royal Society for Protection of Birds in the UK, the Audubon Society in the US. Then there are also certain local museums and data centers which take interest in any sort of new activity which are coming up and how they're going to affect the ecology and aspects around them. And then we also have some non-professional special interest groups such as local natural history or wildlife groups or cultural groups, which also develop an interest towards a new project coming up and how it's going to affect the environment or topics or areas which are close to their heart. So these groups, their inclination, first of all, towards whether they're going to support or oppose these activities, and what sort of mitigation measures and remarks can be addressed in the proposal such that they are in favor of the development and their interests are basically not harmed by your development project. So we also looked up at special interest groups. Then the next lecture was lecture 18, which looked up at AIA law, policy, and institutional arrangements for EIA systems for coastal ecology and geomorphology. So here we again looked up at the different Indian institutes or authorities which are responsible for decision making, especially relating to coastal ecology and geomorphology. So we have the and their different responsibilities. So we have the Ministry of Environment and Forests, which looks up at management of resources in the coastal waters. And their major responsibility is to protect marine environment, and it includes the implementation of the legislative measures which are there. Then we have Department of Ocean Development, which again monitors the marine environment, management of resources in the high seas. Ministry of Agriculture, because of the development of fisheries, aquaculture, fish processing. Ministry of Water Resources, which looks up at erosion. Ministry of Defense or the Indian Coast Guard, which is responsible for pollution response measures, including oil pollutions. Ministry of Surface Transport, which has responsibilities relating the management and maintenance of boats, shipping, etc. Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas to because they do these offshore installation or coastal refineries and pipelines, so they have to ensure that they do not harm the coastal ecology or the coastal environment or the coastal ecosystem. And lastly, the Ministry of Tourism and Ministry of Mines. So these tourism activities and the mining activities in coastal regions again need to be monitored by these respective authorities, and they need to ensure that the requirements and the guidelines are being followed by the different uh, different projects and different installations which are happening. Okay, so these are authorities. Then we also have the different international agreements and legislation relating to the coastal zone. So we have the Convention of Biological Diversity, CBD. We have the Convention on Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals, also known as the Bonn Convention. Then we have the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora sites, the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resource for Food and Agriculture, ITPGR, Ramsar Convention on the Conservation of Wetlands of International Importance, the World Heritage Convention, WHC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, UNCCD, Hugo and Sengay Framework for Disasters, for Actions for Disaster Risk Management, the United Nations Convention on Law of Sea, UN clause, agreement on straddling fish stocks and high migratory fish stocks, and several other conventions which happened relating to coastal and marine biodiversity. So whatever is discussed in the module regarding these conventions, only that much you need to cover for your examination. which is why I'm not going further into details of what all was discussed in these conventions. So for these conventions and agreements, you please refer to the module and remember only the parts which are relevant for your examinations. For your own understanding, you can read deeper about them. A lot of information is available on these conventions, including the documents which state what was their specific aim, what are the signatories to these conventions, and which countries are participants to these, and what all actions have occurred since they were adopted by the different countries. So you can read a lot about all of these conventions if you are interested. But relating to the examination, only whatever is covered in the module, in the lectures which are discussed by Lakra ma'am, only that much is going to come for examination. Okay. So then we also looked up at the rules and laws which these different ministries have relating to coastal and marine ecology and ecosystem. So the ministry MOEFCC, it looks up at Coastal Regulation Zone Notification, Forest Conservation Act, Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act, Hazardous Waste Management Act, Environmental Impact Assessment Notification, Environmental Protection Act, the Indian Wildlife Protection Act, and the Biological Diversity Act. The Ministry of Agriculture or the Ministry of Animal Husbandry, Dairying and Fisheries, it looks up at the Deep Sea Fishing Policy, Indian Fisheries Act, and Marine Fisheries Regulation Act. Ministry of Defense looks after the Indian Ports Act and its enforcement, Major Port Trust Acts, Merchant Shipping Acts, and the Ministry of Shipping looks up at the Coastal Guards Act and Maritime Zone Acts. So these are the different ministries and the different laws or acts which they enforce and ensure that they are being followed from time to time. Then we also looked up at the CRZ notification objectives or the coastal regulation zone notification. So we have different coastal zones. So first of all, we have this low tide line where the tide crosses over. Then we have the high tide line, which is when the water level is higher, it goes up to certain further distance. So that is the high tide line. And then we have certain zones which are defined based on these high tide lines and low tide lines as well. So we have CRZ1A, which is eco-sensitive zones. So different zones, and we also have the what do you call this? So basically, different zones which are decided based on the tide lines. So we have the intertidal area CRZ1B. So CRZ1B is this zone which is between low tide and high tide lines, the intertidal area. Then CRZ2, which is the areas which have been developed up to or close to the shore. So these areas which are developed close to the shore. Then CRZ3A, these areas are where population density is more than 161 square kilometer as per the 2011 census. Then CRZ 3 zones, areas with population density of less than the previous limit. CRZ4A, which is 12 nautical miles from the low tide line, so this zone. And CRZ4B, tidal influence water bodies. And NDZ, which is 50 meters from the high tide line in the different areas. So these are basically the coastal regulation zones. So for different for each of these CRZ coastal regulation zones, we have different rules and guidelines because of the movement of water and because of the soil movement, because of this movement of water, different guidelines and activities have to be regulated. So that is why we have divided the this notification has divided different zones based on the movement of water, and this is to ensure that there's livelihood security for the fisher communities and other local communities which are living in the coastal areas, and also to conserve and protect the coastal stretches. And to promote the development in a sustainable manner based on scientific principles, taking into account the dangers of natural hazards in coastal areas and the sea level rise due to global warming. So all of these areas have different regulations and requirements. So we also looked up at the CRZ notification. Then we also looked up at the Wetlands Conservation and Management Rules of 2010. So we looked up at first at the definition of wetlands. So, wetland means any area of marsh, peatland, or water, natural or artificial, permanent or temporary, with water that is static or flowing, fresh, brackish, or salt water, including areas of marine water, the depth of which at low tide does not exceed 6 meters and includes all inland waters such as lakes, reservoirs, tanks, backwaters, lagoons, creeks, estuaries, and man made wetlands, and the zone of direct influence on wetlands. So, this was the definition which the Wetlands Conservation and Management Rules included. So, it considers all of these areas. Okay. And then we also looked up at biodiversity and protected areas. So, we looked up at the different kind of uh, wetlands and coastal ecology profiles. And we also looked up at the National Wetland Conservation Program, which looks up at the nationally important wetlands. So we have different wetlands at different in the different states. So we also looked up at this. Then we also looked up at biodiversity and protected areas in India. So we looked up at marine protected areas or MPAs. So marine protected areas is essentially a space in the ocean where human activities are more strictly regulated than the surrounding water. It is similar to parks, which we have on land. So for parks, we have more regulations considered. Um, so similar to that, we have marine protected areas where human activities are more regulated than the activities which are happening on water. So these include places which require special protections from natural or historic marine resources by local, state, territorial, native, regional, or national authorities. So marine protected areas can be any of these places. Okay. So, for example, we looked up at the two examples of marine protected areas. So, we looked up at the Pulicat Lake in Andhra Pradesh, uh, which is which we discussed, and then we also looked up at the Campbell Bay in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, which is another marine protected area. Okay. Then we also looked up at the activities which are permissible under the different conservation in the various conservation levels. So, marine activities like research, whether it is permitted in national parks, sanctuaries, community reserves, or conservation reserves. So, it is permitted with permission in certain places, with restrictions in certain places. And so, in some of these categories, they are not even allowed. So, non extractive kind of research where you don't take samples uh, out of these areas are permitted in all of these sorry, in all of these areas, in all of these category of areas. The non-extractive traditional use is not permitted in national parks. So when you have communities living around, they use traditionally they use resources from all of these spaces. So it is not allowed in national parks and sanctuaries, whereas for community reserved it is allowed. So similar kind of activities, and whether these are accepted in national parks, sanctuaries, community reserves, or conservation, those are discussed. So activities in these marine environment can include research, extractive or non-extractive, shipping, traditional fishing, or collection of collection in accordance with cultural tradition and their use, untreated waste discharge, fishing, local fishing, harbor ports, dredging, mining, renewable energy generation. So all of these are different kind of activities which can happen in coastal areas, and whether they are permitted or not depends on the category and type of the protection level, basically. Then we also looked up at the Indian Wildlife Protection Act of 1972 in the context of marine protected areas. So we had the Wildlife Protection Amendment Act of 1991 to protect marine flora and fauna. The Wildlife Protection Act in 2002, which introduced protected areas through the inclusion of a particular section. So protected area means national park, sanctuary, conservation reserve, or a community reserve, which is notified under different sections of this act. Okay. Then there are also sanctuaries, which are for the purpose of protecting, propagating, or developing wildlife or its environment, such that these areas have adequate ecological, flora, fauna, geomorphological, natural, or geological significance. So these are basically declared by state government or by central government when it meets the requirements in all of these categories. Then we have national parks, which are areas of ecological flora, fauna, geomorphological, or zoological association or importance. So they are declared as national parks for again protecting, propagating, or developing wildlife or its environment. So they are again declared by state government or by central government. So the difference is in sanctuaries, there's an adequate uh, it has an adequate significance, whereas national parks have a much higher significance compared to sanctuaries. Then we also looked up at the Conservation Reserve, which was introduced through the amendment of the Wildlife Protection Act in 2003. So it had two objectives, which is improving the socio-economic condition of people and the conservation of wildlife. So conservation reserves are areas which are owned by the state government and are adjacent to or linked to protected areas. So those are conservation reserves. Then we also looked up at certain policies and guidelines. So we looked up at the UK shoreline management plans, estuary management plan, coastal habitat management plans. We also looked up at initiative for flood and coastal defense work. So we looked up at framework on maritime spatial planning and integrated coastal management, which was adopted by the European Commission, and the coastal management strategies, ICZM. Then moving on to next lecture, which was on laws, policy, and institutional arrangements for EIS system relating to noise. So we looked up at international levels, legislation, guidance, and standard. So this was for Europe, we have the European Directive 7157 EEC, which gives permissible sound levels for vehicle exhaust systems. Then we looked up at the United States Federal Emission Standards, which falls under the Noise Control Act of 1972. Noise map is used by countries like Europe, and it's referenced in the European Directive 70. So noise map is basically when countries prepare noise maps relating to given land use or density of project areas and manage noise where necessary, also to prevent specified quiet areas from getting noisier. So they have different requirements of noise relating to the different activity or the land use planning and density and project areas and different kind of categories. So they have noise standards, limiting noise benchmarks, which cannot thresholds which cannot be crossed over. And if they cross over, there are penalties and fines and certain things which happen. So that's a noise map. So then we also looked up at the key standards and guidelines for measurement and assessment of noise and vibration. So you can go through these standards by yourself. So we have the World Health Organization giving the night noise guidelines for Europe, the British standard, which gives you code of practice for noise and vibration control on construction and open sites. So it has two parts. Part one is on noise, and part two is on vibration. So it gives you details of what activities and what kind of noise levels are mentioned. Then the EPA, Environmental Protection Authority of Australia, also has noise guidelines. Hong Kong also has noise guidelines. There's several British standards for different kind of activities, buildings, vibration, and other things. So highway agency also has a manual for roads and bridges, noise and vibration section. Road traffic also, Welsh has guidelines. So these were certain international ones. Then we also have a national noise level policy and guidance. So Constitution of India Article 21 says which grants the right to life to the citizens of India. So it mentions so it's in a larger sense, it mentions that dignity or right to a better life is maintained. So, according to the Indian Penal Code, however, we have Chapter 14, which gives certain offenses. So, the section 268, 287, 288, 290, 291, and 294 under the Indian Penal Code, they deal with noise pollution. We also have the Motor Vehicle Act, which says which has guidelines related to the use of horns in vehicles. So horns that are too loud and can cause nuisance are not allowed to be used under this act. The Code of Criminal Procedure, Section 133 of the Code of Criminal Procedure, uh, it gives the authority to remove something that is causing nuisance. So all of these different kind of noise level laws and policies are existing in India as well. We also had the noise pollution control, which under the criminal procedure 1973. So it basically to prevent noise pollution of any kind. specifically relating to this section. Then the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1981. So not just air pollution, but also noise pollution is covered in this section. So the CPCB has to ensure that this is also met. Okay. Then the Environment Protection Act 1986 and Environmental Protection Rules of 1986. So Section 6 covers environmental pollution. And under this, we have the state or the central government, which make the allowable limits of environmental pollutants, including noise. And entry 89 of Schedule 1 of Environmental Protection Rules provides noise standards for firecrackers, and it prohibits the manufacture, sale, or use of firecrackers generating noise level exceeding 125 decibels or 145 decibels at 4-meter distance from the point of bursting. So several rules are there under different protection acts relating to noise. So in terms of actions that can be taken by the Central Pollution Control Board in respect to noise pollution, so the CPCB has to prepare a methodology for formulation of noise mapping in India, and it has to submit its action plan focusing on following issues. So noise level monitoring with the help of police department and initiation of remedial actions. It also has to obtain noise monitoring devices and install them at several locations. And they have to train their staffs as well regarding the use of such devices. So this was a letter which was dated in 2020 to submit an action plan, and the CPCB did submit an action plan on all of these noise relating actions which can be taken. Then the last lecture, which was covered in this week, was lecture 20, which looked up at law, policy, and institutional arrangements for EIS systems relating to ecosystem services. So, ecosystem services, anything, services are services or benefits that people obtain out of the ecosystem. So, we have discussed them previously. So, there are four kinds of services: provisioning services, regulating services, supporting services, and cultural services. So, we have talked about them in the previous lectures. So we looked up at few definitions like the gross ecosystem product, GEP, which is an indicator to measure the total economic value of all ecosystem products and services. So it considers the total value of final ecosystem goods and services supplied for human well-being in a region annually. And it can be measured in terms of biophysical value and monetary value. So different ecosystems can be measured and covered in this gross ecosystem product, GEP. Then we also looked up at the IUCN and India and the different themes under which it acts. So we have so different themes under which it acts. Let us move on to the next section. Otherwise, we will not be able to cover this. All of this is discussed in the slides in the lecture unit. This was just for the highlight. So it covers the different themes and gives different support on different activities basically under each theme. So, and then we also looked up at international agreements and policy objectives relating to ecosystem services. In the national policies and services also were discussed in this lecture. Certain examples relating to initiatives which are relating to ecosystem services in the different in US, UK, Brazil, etc. All of them were discussed. Certain examples again, all of these were discussed. International examples were also discussed. Okay. So let us now move on to the question and answers. So first we are going to have practice questions from the previous run of the course. So I would request you to write your answers in the chat box when I put the question out. Okay. So the first question is UNESCO global geoparks are important for the conservation, protection, and management of their fossils, stratigraphy, minerals, or other geological interests. So is this statement true or false? Okay, so we have an answer A. That is, the statement is true. Okay, another A. Okay, so this is correct. The statement is true. So they are important for conservation, protection, and management of fossil stratigraphy minerals or other geological interests. UNESCO Global Geoparks. Areas and sites, geographical areas where sites and landscape of international geological significance are managed with a holistic concept of protection, education, and sustainable development. Okay, so this statement is true. Moving on. So, development has the potential to convert contaminated land to uncontaminated land and vice versa without actually changing the chemistry of the ground at depth. Is this statement true or false? So, this is relating to soil and geology. We have two false coming in. Okay, so everybody is saying false. So the statement is true actually. So within the context of contaminated land in the in EIA, development can happen, and development has the potential to convert contaminated land to uncontaminated land and vice versa without actually changing the chemistry of the ground at depth. So development can happen, but it does not change the chemistry, which is the basically the geomorphological character of the soil at the depth. So, so development can happen, and it can convert contaminated land to uncontaminated land, and it can convert uncontaminated land to contaminated land, but will not change the uh, s- uh, geomorphological characteristic of the site because that has developed over several years. Okay, we need to understand the question more in depth. Okay. So, moving on. So, India is not a signatory of the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD. Is this statement true or false? We have talked about this in the revisions as well. Again, I would suggest to make a note of what conventions India has signed on to, especially the significant ones, and in what year they have signed it, and if any action relating to that has been discussed in the lecture videos. Okay, so we have an A, another true. Okay. So the statement says India is not a signatory of the Convention on Biological Diversity. That is, India has not signed onto this particular convention. So this is a negative statement, basically. Okay. Okay, we are seeing to false. So the statement is false. India signed the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD, in the year 1994, even though the convention happened in 1992. But India is a signatory to the Convention on Biological Diversity. So always read the questions thoroughly. Look if the statement is negative or positive. Okay. So India is a signatory to Convention on Biological Diversity. So the statement given is false. Okay. Moving on to the next question. Which of the following provide key codes of practices relating to ecology? First, performance standards by IFC. Second, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD. Third, Asian Development Bank, ADB. And fourth, African Development Bank, AFDB. Sorry. So, which of the following agencies provide key codes of practices relating to ecology? Okay, we have an answer A. Okay, so the correct answer is all of the above, that is D. That is, all of these agencies provide key codes of practices relating to ecology. So again, we have discussed them in the module which looks up at law legislation for ecology. So make a note of agencies which play a role in different aspects, especially international ones as well as specific to India, which is why we have discussed the different agencies which have come up and what roles they play. So relating to ecology, all of the four agencies, that is performance, we have the performance standards by IFC, the International Finance Corporation, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD, Asian Development Bank, ADB, and the African Development Bank, AFDB. All of them gives you key codes of practice relating to ecology. So D, all of the above is the correct answer. Moving on to the next question. So, state true or false. Royal Society for Protection of Birds, RSPB, in the UK is an example of a special interest group. Is the statement true or false? Okay, so we have two trues. Okay, we have another true. Okay, so the statement is true. We looked up at this example in the special interest groups which we were looking at in ecology. So the RSPB, the Royal Society for Protection of Birds, they carry out conservation works that they see from spaces built from ground up. They protect habitat, save species, and help to end the nature and climate emergency. And they work in five major areas: science, species, places, people, and policy. So the statement is true. That is, the Royal Society for Protection of Birds is an example of a special interest group. Okay, so moving on. Match the Indian Institute mentioned in Group A with their responsibilities in coastal areas in Group B. So in Group A, we have Indian institutes, and in Group B, we have their responsibilities in coastal areas. So you need to match Group A with Group B. Again, agencies or ministries or funding agencies or financing agencies, and what roles they play in different environmental parameters. Okay, we have an answer C. Okay, another C, 1D we have. Okay, another C. So C is the correct answer. So Ministry of Environment and Forest, P, it looks up at management of resources in the coastal water. It is the nodal ministry with major responsibility for protecting the marine environment, and it includes the implementation of legislative measures. So P matches with 4. The Ministry of Agriculture looks around the development of fisheries, aquaculture, and fish processing, considering in the coastal areas. So Q matches with 3. Then Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, it looks after the offshore installation, coastal refineries and pipelines and regulations relating to these kind of activities. So it is responsible for our matches with 1. And lastly, the Ministry of Defense, Indian Coast Guard, it looks around the pollution response measures, including oil pollution. So S matches with 2. So the correct answer is C, that is P matches with 4, Q matches with 3, R matches with 1, and S matches with 2. Okay. So moving on to the next question. So again, match the terms in Group A with their description in Group B. So in Group A, we have terminologies, and in Group B, we have their description or definition. So you need to match Group A with Group B. Okay, we have a D. We have another D. Okay, so D is the correct answer. So sanctuaries are for the purpose of protecting, propagating, or developing wildlife or its environment in areas having adequate ecological, faunal, floral, geomorphological, natural, or geological significance. So adequate is the keyword here. So P matches with 3. Then national parks are areas of ecological, faunal, floral, geomorphological, or zoological association or importance may be declared for protecting, propagating, or developing wildlife or its environment. So Q matches with 1. Then conservation reserves are areas which are owned by the state government and are adjacent to or linked to protected areas. So R matches with 4. And community reserves are protected areas, privately owned land, either by an individual or the entire community, which includes wildlife resources. So S matches with 2. So the correct answer is D, that is P matches with 3, Q matches with 1, R matches with 4, and S matches with 2. Okay, moving on. Uh, Match the IFC performance standards mentioned in Group A with their themes in Group B. So in Group A, we have a performance standard number, and in Group B, we have their uh, themes around which they operate. So the International Finance Corporation has these performance standards, which are referred to as performance standard 1 to I think 6 or 7. These were discussed in the lecture units at different for different environmental parameter. Okay, we have another A. Okay, we have another A. Okay. So A is the correct answer. So the International Finance Corporation, it has 8 standards. So the first one is around risk management. So performance standard 1 looks up at the assessment and management of environmental and social risks and impacts. So P matches with 2. Performance standard 3 is on resource efficiency. So it looks up at resource efficiency and pollution prevention. So Q matches with 3. Performance standard 6 looks up at biodiversity, conservation, and sustainable management of living natural resources. So R matches with 1. So the correct answer is P matches with 2, Q matches with 3, and R matches with 1. So A is the correct answer. So the other standards in IFC are standard 2, which looks up at labor, standard 4, which looks up at community, 5 looks up at land resettlement, 7 looks up at indigenous people, and 8 looks after cultural heritage. Okay. So moving on, under the Environment Protection Act of 1986, which of the following rules or standards does CPCB provide for noise? So is it first noise limits for vehicle and airport, second noise limits for generator, third firecracker noise rules, or fourth WHO? So which of the following options is correct? Okay, we have an answer B. Okay, we have another B. Okay, so B is the correct answer. So, under the Environment Protection Act 1986 and the Environmental Protection Rules of 1986, the CPCB provides uh, follows rules or standards and provides support for noise limits for vehicles and airport, noise limits for generator, and firecracker noise rules. So, 1, 2, and 3 are the correct answers. So, B is the correct option. Okay, so moving on to the next question. So, state true or false. The Nagoya Protocol on Access and Benefit Sharing (ABS) aims at fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the utilization of genetic resources, including by appropriate access to genetic resources and by appropriate transfer of relevant technologies between the signatories of this protocol. So, is the statement true or false? Okay, we have an answer true. Okay, another true. Okay, so the statement is true. So, under the Nagoya Protocol on Access and Benefit Sharing, which happened in October 2010, 192 countries agreed to a new strategic plan of action on biodiversity and ecosystems with the vision that by 2050, biodiversity is valued, conserved, restored, and widely used, maintaining ecosystem services, sustaining a healthy planet, and delivering benefits essential for all people. So, under this, protocol, they aimed at having fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the utilization of genetic resources. So there were two parts to it, that they are going to have appropriate access to genetic resources, and there's going to be an appropriate transfer of relevant technologies between the signatories, all of these signatory uh, countries. So this statement is true. Okay. Moving on to the next question. So the HE targets are related to A, conservation of energy, B, conservation of water, C, conservation of biodiversity, and D, none of the above. Okay, so we have an answer C, another C, okay, another C. Okay, so the AG targets are related to the conservation of biodiversity. So C is the correct answer. So under the AG targets, we have different targets. That is, we have understanding the values, biological values, mainstreaming biodiversity, addressing incentives, sustainable protection, sustainable fisheries, reducing pollution, minimizing reef loss, protected areas, preventing extinctions, conserving the gene pool, restoring ecosystems. So all of these are different targets relating to biodiversity. So India also has prepared a National Biodiversity Action Plan, NBAP in 2008, and an additional addendum to the action plan in 2014 with 12 national biodiversity targets, which were developed in line in accordance to the HE biodiversity targets. So that is the report which it has developed. But the HE targets are related to conservation of biodiversity. So C is the correct answer. Okay, moving on. So, which institute is responsible for management of resources in the coastal water? Nodal ministry with major responsibility for protecting marine environment includes implementation of legislative measures. Is it A, Ministry of Environment and Forests, B, Ministry of Agriculture, C, Department of Ocean Development, or D, Ministry of Water Resources? Okay, we have an answer A. Okay, another A. Okay, another A. Okay. So A is the correct answer. So Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change. That is the ministry which is responsible for management of resources in coastal water, and it's the nodal ministry with the major responsibility for protecting the marine environment and implementing legislative measures. Okay, so these are so again agencies and their roles in particular environment are relevant from this week's content. Generally, agent definitions, full forms, the aims and intentions of acts, protocols, legislation, what are the agencies and what are their roles and responsibilities in a particular uh, environmental parameter. These are relevant from the examination point of view, and questions will be in similar format to what we have seen in the assignments. Okay, so please make a note and revise them thoroughly before your examination. Okay, moving on. Which coastal regulation zone area is known as intertidal zone? Is it A, CRZ1B, B, CRZ2A, C, CRZ1A, or D, CRZ1B? So we looked up at the different coastal regulation zones. So the intertidal zone is between the high tide line and the low tide line. But what is the terminology for this coastal region zone? That is, what is the characteristic value which is given? Okay, so we have a lot of A's. So A is the correct answer. So 1B is the intertidal area, which is this area between the low tide line and the high tide line. Okay. So this is also a relevant figure from the coastal regulation or the coastal ecology lecture unit. Okay, moving on. How many biospheres were established by the Government of India in the country categories relating to the IUCN? Is it A 10, B 14, C 18, or D 20? So the number of biospheres which the Government of India identified. Okay, this is again from the lecture unit on ecology. Okay, we have the answer C. Okay. 18 C. So C is the correct answer. That is, the government identified 18 biospheres. So these are identified in the different states. So you have Nanda Devi in Uttarakhand, you have Kanchenjunga in Assam, uh, Panna in MP, Pachmari in MP, Run of Kutch, Gujarat, Achin Kamar in Chhattisgarh, Nilgiri. All of these are biosphere reserves. And the ones which have a circle around them, these are also included in the UNESCO World Network. So we also looked up at the UNESCO World Network in the uh, ecology unit. So you can refer to these diagram as well to know which areas are covered. Although we have not discussed them category wise, but this is for additional information. But the number of reserves, biospheres have been mentioned in the slide. So this question can come. Okay, so moving on. Which country has not taken part in project Natural Capital Accounting and Valuation of Ecosystem Services? A, Brazil, B, China, C, India, or D, USA? So again, this is a negative statement. Which country has not taken part? So read the questions carefully before you answer them. Sometimes there could be negative questions. So this is from the module on ecosystem services where we looked up at, okay, we have B. Okay, we have a D as well. So we looked up at examples. Okay, we have divided opinion between D and B. So D is the correct answer. So the National Capital Accounting and Valuation of Ecosystem Services project, or the NCAVES project, it was funded by the European Union and has been jointly implemented by the United Nations Artistic Division, United Nations Environment Program, and the Secretariat of the Convention of Biodiversity, Biological Diversity. So India is one of the 5 countries which took part in this project, and the other countries are Brazil, China, South Africa, and Mexico. So USA has not taken part in this project. It's just 5 countries: India, Brazil, China, South Africa, and Mexico. Okay, so D is the correct answer because this was a negative statement. Okay, moving on. Which country initiated the International Union for Conservation of Nature project? That is the IUCN. So is it A, India, B, China, C, Brazil, or D, USA? Okay, we have A, India. One answer. We have another answer is A. So, which country started or initiated the IUCN project? Okay, we have another A. Okay, so the correct answer is B, China. So China was the IUCN was founded in the October of 1948 as the International Union for Protection of Nature, or IUPN. Uh, so it was founded in the year of 1948 in France, but then the country which initiated the IUCN was China. Okay, so again, in which country did it? Hello. Can you please mute yourself if you have joined recently? Okay, thank you. So the country which initiated the IUCN was China. Okay. So moving on. So these were all the questions from week 4. We will not discuss the week 4 assignment because the deadline has not passed. We will discuss it in the week 5 problem solving session. So we will now discuss the week 3 assignment with the solutions. So most of you would have solved this already and would know the answers. So this is just for a revision point of view because the deadline for this has now passed. So we can now discuss the answers. Okay, moving on. So the first question, match the following global environmental timeline. So you have the year and the relevant event, conventional act which happened, or the disaster which happened in group B. So you need to match group 1 with group B. So again, years and what convention happened when is important, as you would have seen questions around this in the assignment as well. Okay, we have C and we have a B. Okay, we have another C, another C. Okay, so C is the correct answer. So in 1974, we have the United Nations Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, so which is known as CITES, CITES. Then in 1973, we had the United Nations Conference on the Law of Sea in New York. 1978 was the year in which the Moco Cadiz oil spill happened in Brittany. And 1974 was the United Nations Conference on Human Settlements in Vancouver, Canada. So C, that is P matches with 2, Q matches with 1, R matches with 4, and S matches with 3 is the correct answer. Okay, so moving on to the next question. So again, match the following global environmental timeline. So again, group 1 has the years and group 2 has the uh, action or event disaster which happened. So again, we have C is coming in. Okay, so C is again the correct answer. So in 1981, we had the Global Strategy for Health for All by the year 2000 by the World Health Assembly of World Health Organization. So P matches with 3. Then in 1984, we had the Bhopal gas tragedy in Bhopal, India. So Q matches with 4. 1979 was the year the Convention on Long Range Transboundary Air Pollution was adopted. So R matches with 1. And in 1980, the World Conservation Strategy was published by the International Union for Conservation of Nature. And it's published this section on towards sustainable development. So S matches with 2. So C is the correct answer, where P matches with 3, Q matches with 4, R matches with 1, and S matches with 2. Okay. So again, these kind of questions can come in your final examinations as well from the global timeline. Okay, moving on. So a state true or false. In 2003, United Nations General Assembly endorsed the United Nations Decade of Education for Sustainable Development. So is the statement true or false? Okay, so we have a lot of true. So the statement is true. Again, this is a question out of the timeline. Moving on, question 4. State true or false. In 2005, the Millennial Ecosystem Assessment, or the MEA, was released. So is this statement true or false? Okay, so this statement is true. Okay. Again, questions out of the timeline itself are coming through. Moving on, the foundations for the effective EIA system are one, clear basis in law and regulation, two, clear basis of objectives and statement, three, mandatory compliance and enforcement, and four, comprehensive scope of applications to proposal with potential significant impact. So, which of these are the correct answers? Okay, so we have a few D's coming in. So D is the correct answer. That is, an effective EIA system is clear in uh, is clearly written in legal language and regulation basis. It is clear in terms of the objectives and statements which are stated. It mentions the mandatory compliance and enforcement procedure. And there's a comprehensive scope of applications to proposals with potentially significant impact. So all of these are effective EIA's foundation system. So D is the correct answer. Moving on, so match the stages in the EIA notification of 2006 prior environmental clearance process for new projects. So we have the different stages, and we have in group 2 the description or the title for these different stages. So this is from the EIA method. So we have C's coming in. Okay, another C. Okay, so C is the correct answer. Stage 1 is screening only for category B projects and activities. So Q matches with 1. Stage 2 is scoping. P matches with 2. Stage 3 is public consultation. So S matches with 3. And stage 4 is appraisal. So R matches with 4. So C, P matches with 2, Q matches with 1, R matches with 4, and S matches with 3 is the correct answer. Okay, moving on. The National Ambient Air Quality Standard or guidelines for the number of common pollutants differ with respect to one, pollutant target, two, concentration level, three, averaging times, and four, measurement protocols. So, which of these is the difference between the national air quality standards in differing with the pollutants? Okay, so we have a lot of D's. So D is the correct answer. That is, it considers all of these different parameters to differentiate between the pollutants uh, and their uh, guidelines, basically. So D is the correct answer. Moving on to the next question. So the types of policy instrument are one, regulations and regulatory policy standard, two, market-based instruments, three, research and development, and four, treaties and agreements. So which of these are the types of policy instruments? Okay, so we have a lot of D's coming in again. So again, D is the correct answer. So all of these are the type of policy instruments which can be used for implementing the policies. So D, that is all of these are the correct answer. Okay, moving on. What does UNEP in the context of EIA stand for? So again, this is a full form based question. So what is the full form of UNEP? Is it A, United Nations Environmental Program, United National Environmental Program, B, United Nations Ecological Program, C, United Nations Environment Program, or D, United Nations Ecology Program? Okay, I think a lot of you know this. So C is the correct answer. That is, UNEP stands for United Nations Environment Program. So even in the context of EIA, the UNEP is the body. So C is the correct answer. Moving on to question 10, the CPCB stands for, again, a full form based question. A, Central Processing Control Board, Control Band, B, Central Pollution and Coastal Branch, C, Center of Pollution and Control Board, or D, Central Pollution Control Board. Okay, a lot of D's again. Okay, so D is the correct answer. That is, CPCB stands for Central Pollution Control Board. Okay, so that is it for the questions. So if you have any queries, you can either raise your hand or just unmute yourself and ask relating to this week or relating to in general, or you can put it in the chat box as well. Did you find difficulty in understanding any concept in week 4 lectures? Or if you have a general query regarding the course or the examination? Okay, if nobody has any queries, we also did not receive any queries in the discussion forums relating to this week's content. So I think with that, I think we are ready to close this session for today. In the exam, we have multiple choice questions. Okay, so in the exams, you can either have single choice questions in which one option can be correct. You can also have multiple choice questions and it will state that it is a multi-select question, that is a MSQ, in which more than one options can be correct. So you will mostly have these kind of questions which we have seen in the assignments as well. So you have different types of questions like fill in the blanks or state true or false or match the followings, but the options are given in the ABCD format. So you have to choose that. So they are going to be multiple choice questions only, mostly similar to what we see in assignments. Okay. So does anybody have any other queries? Okay. So, if nobody has any queries, we can close the session. If you have any feedback or if you want to suggest some improvement to this problem solving session or to the course, you can also give your feedback now. The recording for this lecture as well as these slides will be made available in the problem solving session tab in your course program. So you can access the recording as well as the slides from there. Okay. Thank you so much for attending this session and hope to see you in the next session. Okay, with that, I think I can now close the session.